problems in your life and our society stemmed from one thing. And by becoming conscious of this one thing and freeing our minds from it, our lives would improve drastically. To understand this concept, picture a tree with each of the major problems in society represented by a branch. For example, on a societal level, we have global pandemics, environmental destruction, and racial injustice. On an individual level, we have problems like mental health issues, unhealthy relationships, and problems like addiction. Now, typically, once these problems arise, we tend to target the branches themselves. However, if we get to the very root of the problem, we can prevent these issues from even arising. So what is the root of these problems? You probably already guessed from the title of this video. It's toxic individualism. Now, what is toxic individualism? It is a mindset where thinking is oriented solely around the individual person and disregards other fellow humans. In America, this individualistic way of thinking is promoted in everything we do. We have this belief that we are better off as individuals rather than as a collective whole. We've all heard the term pull yourself up from the bootstraps. With this comes beliefs such as this person is poor because they didn't work hard enough, rather than trying to understand and solve the issue of poverty in our society. On a personal level, we make the assumption that everything is about me. This mindset leads to consistent acts of self-interest and ignorance, which doesn't work to solve anything, but rather creates problems in the world. The culture of toxic individualism has deep roots, and in order to free our minds from it, we must do some deep digging. So how did these toxic seeds even become planted? Well, it turns out that the toxic individualistic mindset serves as the foundation of not only our education and political system, but the establishment of this entire country. The very creation of the U.S. was facilitated by racist ideologies that viewed Native Americans as lesser breeds, whose exploitation was necessary for colonial expansion. A majority of public schools failed to fully uncover how the Native Americans were violently killed, raped, removed from their sacred lands, and forced to assimilate into American society. The displacement of natives coincided with the increase of slavery and also violent military force against people in the region that used to be Mexico. It would be naive to think that these historical acts of violence didn't carry on into the present and affect us today. So how can we begin to free ourselves from toxic individualism and ignorance in our own lives? Because while it was not our fault that we were conditioned with this mindset, it is our responsibility to free ourselves from it and not allow it to persist. I myself have been guilty of possessing this mindset, and so I looked for ways to free myself from it and came up with 5 primary ways. But before you could even begin to change your mindset, the first step is becoming aware of it. Most people aren't even conscious that they possess this mindset, and so it all starts with recognizing that you have it. Alright, so the first way that you can release yourself of toxic individualism is spending time in nature. Many have the assumption that we are separate from nature and other people rather than interconnected to it. By turning this around, we can incorporate ourselves into a larger collective picture and develop a broader sense of reality. Try to notice things such as the symbiotic relationships among species and how everything is connected and part of creation itself. This will ignite within you a deeper sense of interconnection with the world and overall a higher well-being. Number 2, becoming part of a community. A lot of other societies around the world operate off of a collective orientation, but here in the US, everybody's problem is their own. If we were to rethink ourselves as social creatures who are fundamentally dependent upon one another, we would treat each other differently because our very conception of self would not be defined by individual self-interest. Number 3, educating yourself on the truth. Question what you've been conditioned to know. What toxic worldviews did your parents pass on to you? What were you taught to believe in school? For example, many people picked up the notion of racism from their parents and family members. At the same time, the public school system failed to fully uncover the reality of systemic racism in this country, and so racism persists in our society even today. Number 4, showing empathy. Learning to understand other people requires dropping toxic individualism and putting yourself in the shoes of someone else. Realize that people of color are expected to simply ignore the trauma of slavery as a condition for full citizenship, and that they are subject to a system that was built to subjugate them. So instead of labeling them a certain way and seeing them as lesser, We should show empathy and see them as worthy people who are simply mistreated. Number 5, doing a good deed. Ask yourself how you can make a positive impact. It could be as simple as speaking up and not being a bystander when you witness someone else being mistreated. For me, I free myself of toxic individualism by picking up trash off the ground outside, whereas before I would have had thoughts such as, that's not my job. But once I started incorporating myself into a larger collective picture, I started to work towards the change that I wish to see in the world. Alrighty, that's all I have for you guys this week. Now before you go, make sure you hit subscribe down below, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and I will see you soon for episode 5.